do you think there's any momentum for fundamentally changing the way the political West look at economics? Because after two world wars, it looked like we kind of learned our lessons a bit with wild capitalism. That is, from 45 to, well, 1980, we kind of had uh, some restraint. We had more intervention into the economy for different reasons, but nonetheless, this was seen as acceptable. But until the 1970s, when, as you suggested before, we had economic stagnation, and the solution was, well, let's just deregulate, remove some social responsibility, yeah, get rid of all this public ownership, and the assumption then being, you have a more flexible economy, then we can get it to grow, which many would say, yeah, was a good idea to get things going, but it would probably be good as a temporary tool, and until the economy starts running again, and then kind of reintroduced some of the regulation and social responsibility. But instead, we saw in the 1980s these deregulated markets, where the market runs wild without any intervention. It became an ideology under Reagan, Thatcher, and suddenly the political right couldn't intervene in the market to protect the traditional values and institutions, be it church or family, whatever it would be. The political left couldn't redistribute wealth, and you saw problems build up through the 80s, and then you would have thought at the end of the 80s, now is the time to tighten up a bit and make sure that society doesn't go out of control, as you mentioned, economic inequalities. But then, of course, the Soviet Union collapses, and suddenly liberal economics goes on steroids in the following hubris. And for the past 30 years, we've all been worshipping at the altar of the free market, where, well, the market will take care of everything. Society is just some appendage that will follow wherever the market goes. But it seems that we have come to the end of the road. As we have this, do you see any indications that we might try to get back on track, challenge the religion of our time, which is this free market?
Yes, I do think it's possible, and I know since we're coming to the end of the time that we have, let me be bold and tell you what I imagine might happen. Okay? If I ask myself, as I have, and as my profession does, what is the secret? What did the Chinese figure out that enabled them to have the economic growth record of the last 30 to 40 years? I mean, that should be the number one question. Adam Smith is considered the founder of economics because he asked the question, as per the title of his great book, what accounts for, quote, the wealth of nations? He asked himself. That should be, that was his question. That should be ours. And if you ask that question, then the country you want to focus on is China, at least if you want to explain the growth. You might want to focus elsewhere if you want to explain the absence of growth. And that's sort of what Smith did. We need it again. And if you do that kind of thing, if you take the discipline of economics seriously, then you will know that the Chinese have proceeded by asking themselves, what is it to get economic growth? What is it that we should be doing as state enterprise? And what should we be doing as private enterprise? What can we do? What do we need to do to keep it in Chinese hands? What can we allow to be done by foreign hands? And they have very practically, very pragmatically answered that question. And they've produced a hybrid economy, an economy that is varyingly, but roughly 50-50 private and state. Heavily Chinese, but with a big allowance for foreign enterprises to function. Very practical. They have not been ideological. They didn't do what you can argue the Russians did by prioritizing state enterprise. And they didn't do what the West did by prioritizing private enterprise and raising it to the level of ideological hysteria. Well, That would be an interesting argument. You could make that, but we don't do that. But here comes my optimism. I think we will. I think there will be, and there already is in the United States, a growing question. What exactly have the Chinese, why are they better than we are in electric vehicles, in solar panels, in AI that is practically usable, and on and why are they contesting us in the most advanced semiconductor chips and all the rest of it? Those questions are being asked with the inevitable follow-up. So I think we are learning that we have been stuck in a horrible, stale development of a debate which is better, private or government. And that was the wrong question. For me, that's about as interesting as asking which is better, Tuesday or Friday, or which is the better number, 6 or 9. These are questions that are senseless. Who cares? It's all the results that matter, not this purity test of public or private. Where did we get that crazy idea? If for every example you can show me where private did something better than public equivalent, I'll show you the opposite. What have we achieved by that? Nothing. That's the whole point. Sometimes this is a better way. Sometimes this is an alternative is a better way. We do that everywhere else. What is this religious problem here that we have, which is really what it is? The effort of the private sector to protect itself against what? Against the government. That's all it's ever been. The fear of the government, because with universal suffrage, the government is in the end beholden to the workers who are the majority. And for a capitalist, that's always been a problem. How can you possibly coexist in a society with universal suffrage and democratic voting? You're always at risk. How do you handle the risk? By preventing the public sector from touching your economy. So you hold it back from exercising its democratic origins to control the economic life. It's childish when you think about it this way. I think that's emerging in this country. I even think it's part of the general strike in Minneapolis today. It is an awareness of people, finally, that they really do have to take control of the system. Even Mr. Trump's popularity was based on an attempt to tell the American people what they already knew. You have lost all control. Vote for me. I'll put what you want into effect. They voted for him, and he's changing nothing. And that's the reality. He didn't change anything fundamental in his first presidency. All he's doing in the second is more theatrics. He learned that. He's got to dominate the daily news cycle, and he's much better at that than he was the first time. And the Europeans, unfortunately, play into that. But I think the hope is both that the European people and the American people will look for changes in the West comparable to the changes Russia and China experience. And what might that be? Let me end with this provocation. What is preventing the Europeans from making a decision that they bet on the wrong horse? They ought to be following Mr. Putin into a long, difficult, but potentially world-changing realignment. There is a rumor that Macron once asked if he and France could join the BRICS. I don't know if that rumor is true or not. But if it isn't, let me suggest that investigating that and forming a Europe which is negotiating with the United States from a position of the strength of an alliance with Russia and China would be a very different future for everybody.
Yeah, no, I always said that the Europeans could learn a bit from the way China developed. That is, I think, we could invite more Chinese capital to Europe, but instead of being a technological colony, it could be done under agreements, such as through also joint ventures, including some technological transfer. All of this would not just allow Europe to thrive, but it would also be a foundation for unity, because the collective bargaining power would be the reasoning behind this. So it would be better than having unity through hate for Russia or the dream of subordination to the United States. And as you said, that could lay a foundation for having more peaceful relations with Russia. Also, by reaching out to the Chinese and diversifying, we could also have a more equal relationship with the United States instead of being so, excessively dependent. But
And it could even in the short run do wonders for Europe to once again have cheap oil and gas flowing in from Russia. I mean, come on, it's kind of obvious that there would be all kinds of benefits. And you're quite right. If you look at the history of China, that's what they did. They basically said to the West, if you come, we will give you cheap industrial trained workers and access to the Chinese market, which is the largest and fastest growing in the world. Well, I've taught in business schools. That's what we teach young entrepreneurs. You want to succeed? Go where the wages are low and the market is growing. Well, they did. They went to China. Now, what would be the Chinese demand? We will give you the workers. We will give you the access to the market. You've got to share your technology. You've got to share your distribution system. If you go to the big retail in the United States is dominated by Walmart and Target. Okay, so it's dominated. And what you find in those retail stores is all the Chinese material. But the Chinese who could produce a better product could never have accessed the American market without a distribution system, which it would have taken them 50 years to develop. Instead, they made a deal with the American corporation. Walmart, which is the richest corporation, the largest employer in the United States, is absolutely dependent on China. China is part of the Walmart story. Okay? If Walmart could do it, you want to tell me why can't we all do this? Learn from the Chinese, work out a deal, and Europe would be the beneficiary. It too could write the contracts. Europe is a rich market, still is. Europe has got 300-400 million people buying materials. And Europe has less of an inequality problem than we do. You're in a good position. The Chinese need your markets, etc. You can still do it, but you have to do it. And this requires your willingness to question what you're doing. And all I see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I see a Starmer and a Macron and a Merz and a Meloni not able, and the others are no better, not able to even begin to think in anything other than a way in which Russia is the great bear that they have to worry about. There's something very pathetic about it all.